Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Northshire Presents virtual event. My name is Davith Wood, and I'm the events manager at Northshire's Manchester, Vermont location. And I'm here as so often these days, with my good friend and colleague, Rachel Person from Northshire's Saratoga Springs location. Before we get started, and I hand things over to Rachel to introduce our authors, just a few notes. We are recording tonight's event for later broadcast on our YouTube channel, but don't worry, only those of us who are unmuted and in this yellow box will be there for perpetuity. So when you have any questions at any time throughout the evening, please type them in the chat, and then during the Q&A at the end, Rachel and I will save those questions and pose them for you. And then finally, this is something that's happening throughout the industry. We're suggesting to our customers to shop early, shop local, because we've heard of so many delays in shipments and in publications. So we're encouraging you all to start your holiday shopping as soon as you can. All right, without further ado, Rachel, why don't you introduce our authors?
I am so very happy to get to introduce our guests tonight, Allison Larkin and Juliette Fay. I was very lucky to host Juliette Fay for an amazing author lunch at Hattie's Restaurant, just around the corner from her Saratoga Springs store a couple of years ago when she was on book tour for her historical novel, City of Flickering Light. She is the award-winning best-selling author of 5 previous novels, including Shelter Me, a Massachusetts Book Award and Indie Next Pick, and The Tumbling Turner Sisters, a USA Today bestseller. She has joined us tonight to celebrate the release just this week on Tuesday of her brand new novel, Catch Us When We Fall. And we're also joined tonight by Allison Larkin, the internationally best-selling author of the novels Stay, Why Can't I Be You, and Swimming for Sunlight. She's with us tonight to talk about her newest novel, The People We Keep. Please join me in welcoming them both to Northshire. And we'd love to start off with both of you talking a little bit about your new novel. And Juliette, since yours just came out on Tuesday, why don't you go first?
I would be happy to do that. So here's, can you see it? Here we go. Here's the cover, Catch Us When We Fall. And it is a contemporary fiction. And it's about a young woman named Cass Macklin. She's had a tough childhood, and she has spent her 20s with her beloved boyfriend, Ben, sort of partying, doing a lot of partying. And eventually their partying sort of sunk into alcoholism. And in fact, on page 1, Ben has died and she's at his funeral. He's died of alcohol poisoning. And Cass is bereft, she's broke, she is not in good shape, and desperately trying to hang on to sort of a crappy job that she has when she finds out that she's pregnant. And this is kind of the point at which Cass needs to make a real decision about changing her life. And she doesn't have many resources. She doesn't really know any sober, responsible people, except for Ben's brother, Scott, who happens to be a third baseman for the Red Sox. And she turns to Scott sort of warily. The two of them don't have the best of relationships. Scott is not crazy about Cass. He spent the last 10 years bailing her and his brother out of alcohol-fueled messes. And he's not really terribly interested in helping her until he finds out about the pregnancy. And they both have a vested interest in bringing the child of this man that they both loved into the world safely. So they sort of make a deal. And Scott agrees to help her if she stays sober. And that is no small task for Cass. So that's a little bit about Catch Us When We Fall. And I just wanted to say that, originally I had the best time with Northshire for my last book. Hattie's was awesome. It was really fun. And I was so excited to do another event at Northshire. And then it became clear that we needed to do it by Zoom. So I very, very quickly thought about my friend Allison Larkin, whose book, The People We Keep, came out last month, and I loved. It's one of my favorite books of the year. So I was so glad that we can Zoom Allie in from California, and it can be sort of a double event for the two of us.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here to talk with you about your beautiful book, Juliette. it means a lot to me. I'm such a huge fan of yours, and I have been for such a long time. So it's really thrilling, and I was so excited to get to read this new book. And really, it's such a cliche, but I really could not put it down. I sat down to read like a chapter, and the next thing I knew, it was evening, basically, which is just what you want out of a book, which is amazing. I will introduce myself. I'm Allison Larkin. I wrote 3 books as Allie Larkin that are more rom-coms, and then this is my new book, The People We Keep, that is about 16-year-old folk singer April Sawicki, who's living in a back-end upstate New York town, backwoods upstate New York town in a motorless motorhome. And she wants to play guitar. She has this little inkling that her life could be more than it is. And she steals a car and hits the road. And the book follows her as she tries to figure out her place in the world. And her music kind of brings her through different towns and different lives, and she's trying to figure out who her people are and where she belongs. And I love that we get to talk about both of these books, because I think April and Cass kind of come from the same place.
Yeah.
And I'm excited about that. Yeah.
Me too. So I'm sorry, are you done? Are you?
No, go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Okay, great. So I have so many questions. I read The People We Keep on vacation, and everybody would go to bed and I would still be up reading, because I had to find out what was going to happen to April. She's an enchanting character, in part because of her rough edges and her sort of edginess, but also, she's this young 16-year-old girl who I wanted to adopt her. I wanted to bring her home and take care of her, because she was so alone in the world, and yet also very resourceful for a teenager. She figured out, she was so smart in ways that you wouldn't think a 16-year-old could sort of figure out how to manage for themselves. So, and I do think, Cass and April are so alone in the world in so many ways, and left to their own devices, and not always making good decisions, often not making good decisions.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about how April was born. Where did she come from in your brain? And tell us a little bit about your journey with her, because I know you've had an interesting journey with her.
I really have. I was writing my first novel, Stay, back in 2006. I had pages due for a writing group, and I was listening to a playlist, and Dar Williams' song Iowa came on, and I started thinking about, just my mind wandered. I started thinking about what it would be like to be a folk singer, to actually be a folk singer, and what that life looks like. And then it was just like a passing thought. And then the next song that came on was This Is the Sea by a band called the Waterboys. And it talks about like these things you keep, you better throw them away. And that, like, that was the river and this is the sea. Like your life was small and now it's big, and you have to let go of things to embrace the rest of your life. And so those things swirled together in my head. And all of a sudden there was this girl with long brown hair and a guitar. And it was like she was over there going, hey, I'm here, like pay attention to me. And so I actually wrote like the second half of the book first, and she was in the second half of the book, and then I had to figure out how she got there. And that's how the book developed, because all of a sudden I was like, where did she come from? And it was like, oh, she came from this motorhome, this motorless motorhome her dad won in a poker game. And then, you kind of balance things on both sides, where you're like, this is who she is, how was she created? And then this is how she was created, how does that filter through the rest of it? And so it was like a lot of just trying to figure out the balance of her for a very long time. And I just always saw her in my head really clearly and had an idea of what her heart looked like. And I think the thing that I love the most about your books is I feel like that's how your characters exist in your heart too. And I don't want to like put words in your mouth, but I just there's some books you read where you're like, oh, they like they're operating around characters who make sense and have a set of rules. And I just always feel that about your characters, and that's why I connect with them so much, I think. So yeah, how did Cass come about to you?
So Cass, you know, I always knew I would write an alcoholic character because alcoholism has played kind of an important role in my life. I have friends and family members who are, you know, struggle with alcoholism, and my dad in particular. He's been in recovery for 30 years, but he was drinking while I was growing up, and you know that wasn't always great. And just his drinking really affected me. His recovery really affected me too. He finally decided it was time. He joined AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, and he got very involved. And it was like this metamorphosis of somebody sort of coming out of the fog a little bit. And that fascinated me, this sort of emergence of a person into the world, a world that they've been able to sort of hold at bay a little bit behind the veil of alcohol. So I always knew I wanted to write a character. Cass came to me one morning. It's so funny how, you know, I think writers have that we all have these sort of fantasies and daydreams and things, but writers, I think, specifically pay attention to them and sort of breathe life into them instead of just going about their days. So I was in the middle of another project. I was writing something else, and I woke up one morning, sort of, you know, that little edgy, you know, edge of the dream feeling. And I woke up with this image in my head of a casket being lowered into the ground, only two mourners. The woman was drunk and the man was furious. And I sort of lay there looking at this scene and thinking about it and thinking, like, who are these people? Why is she so drunk? Why is he so mad? And the more I thought about them, the more that sort of story of who these people are and why they are clashing and why things are not good here sort of came to me. But I said to myself, like, don't get distracted. You have this project you're working on. Like, don't go off on this other tangent. But I couldn't stop thinking about them. So I decided that I would just write a chapter and I would put it aside and I would come back to it later. Maybe not. Maybe it was just a little piece of fluff that's just, I'm going to forget about. So I wrote that one chapter. But of course, that just ignited things. Like, that made me think more, well, what's going to happen next, you know? So I had to have a little sit down with myself and say, you know what, you're not that into this other thing you're working on. And these people really captured you. So then I sort of just focused my energy on them and figuring out who they were and where they were going and where they had been. And that was exciting for me. Yeah. And I mean, like you really infuse, there are writers that you know that really, you can feel their compassion for their characters, even the not so nice ones.
Yeah.
You know, even the ones that are like bad guys. I mean, I don't like to have bad guys. I think everybody's got good and bad in them. But one of the things that I love is how much compassion you have for all of the characters in your books. That really sort of shines through in such a lovely way. So I have a question for you. How much are you like April?
In some ways, I'm a lot like April in terms of feelings. I've realized that, like, the things that I observe about people, or the things I'm taking into the world, in from the world, like what I notice, sometimes I notice, April's always noticing details of things that aren't necessarily completely relevant to what she's like reading the tea leaves on every situation all the time. And I think that at my most distractible, I'm like that. I did not grow up in a motorless motorhome. I didn't have her upbringing in that way. But I studied voice for 10 years when I was younger. I studied classical voice, and I always wanted to play guitar, and I did a little bit. And the open mic scene at the beginning, I just kind of confessed recently, was inspired by a time in my 20s when I had just written a song and walked into an open mic night by myself alone towards the end of the night. had absolutely no idea what I was doing and just got up on stage and did this thing. And so that's like kind of where she starts but she actually takes that direction in her life. So I mean, I think with all my books, it's like the facts aren't true, but the feelings are. Mm-hmm. And I think I kind of guess that you're painting from a palette of very real feelings too, in a lot of ways, because even though, your experience with alcoholism was observing your father, you also get all the texture of that, and also seeing him recover, you understood what that process was. So you're painting with the right paints, even though, it's like, I mean, I could make all sorts of analogies on that. But I'm always so excited about your books, because I feel like we're doing the same thing with our experiences. And I think you could write a book that takes place on the moon and it would still have a heart that felt true,
Oh, that's nice. Thank you.
So
I did certainly I've talked to my dad plenty about what it feels like, but I also talk to other people. I think I have a few women friends who are, in recovery. And some of the things that they said to me were really, I just wanted to get that. What did it feel like in that skin? What does it feel like to have this thing buzzing at the edge of your consciousness all the time, telling you to do this thing that you're really trying not to do? And I don't really have an experience with that. I mean, we've all, had the devil on our shoulders telling us to do something we knew we shouldn't do, but all the time, the same thing. That was really fascinating to learn about that world. And I went to some AA meetings, and that was really interesting too. I was really impressed. Some of them, I expected them to be more sort of gloomy and remorseful, and there was definitely some of that, but they were very inspiring. And I also saw things that I felt like I could use in my own life. That AA has a lot to offer all of us. The Serenity Prayer to me is sort of something that I live by now, which is the courage to face the things and change the things you can change, the serenity to accept the things you cannot, and the wisdom to know the difference. And that's, very meaningful to me. So that was easy for me to sort of have my characters trying to struggle with, how do I live my life? Cass is always asking, what is a normal life?
Yeah.
And she's got to figure out how to build it for herself.
Yeah, I think something that you addressed so well is the idea that in addiction, in you're missing life stages, and then all of a sudden somebody has to figure out. I mean, and that happens with lots of things. That happens with like childhood trauma. That happens with, it's not, life isn't just the things that happen to you. It's the things you weren't getting while those things happened to you. And I thought that you just addressed that so beautifully. And it, Cass was a little scary to read sometimes, because you were like, oh my gosh, you want her to be okay. You want her to do the right things. And it's scary because you actually don't know if someone's going to be able to pull everything through, and I think the fact that you had her so earnestly wanting and striving, and she actually had an exceptional moral compass, because addiction is not about morals. It's different from that,
That's right. Yeah.
And I thought that was beautiful. I also really thought that, and I mean, now I'm just telling you what I love about your book, but I was in a relationship with an addict when I was in my early 20s, and it ended, and nobody wanted to hear about my grief about that relationship ending. And I thought that you dealt with that so beautifully, in terms of Cass is also grieving in the process of all of this, and to be trying to get sober while somebody is grieving, that has to be, I mean, she's climbing a very big hill, and you gave her so much grace in that process. And I just think that's really beautiful. And then to pivot, you also said it in the world of baseball, which was fascinating, because So I feel like you had to do all this research on that, but also baseball is a thing where it's something that's happening to you and you're maybe not getting all the things out of life that other people who have a more normal life are getting. So both Cass and Scott have some life stages that they've missed. And I wondered if you did that on purpose or it just is how they matched or.
Well, I knew that I didn't want Scott to just be this guy. You know, he had to have his own stuff. And, you know, when I sort of figured out like his drug is baseball, that's how he gets by. That's when it was like, okay, so we're going to have to really like find out more about baseball. My husband is a dyed in the wool from birth. Like I think he came out of the womb with a Red Sox cap on, Red Sox fan. So I had in-house counsel on that, which was great. And we spent a lot of time at Fenway. And I was able to get some very interesting sort of insider information about what it's like to live that life. I was able to, one of the most interesting ones was an airline flight attendant on the Red Sox away games and what they talk about and what they do and how they sort of handle being away from their families and stuff like that. So that was fun. And yeah, so it was very like this, you know, world of alcoholism, world of baseball, you know, sort of, you know, the juxtaposition was kind of interesting. You know, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. One of the things that I loved about your book, and it had some personal meaning for me, is Ithaca. The city of Ithaca is like a character. It's like its own. You just learn so much about it. I actually lived in Ithaca because my dad got his PhD at Cornell when I was a baby, and I remember a little bit about it. But it was sort of like coming home to a place I'd never been before because I didn't know it as that like sort of funky town. I just was like where my parents lived, you know. So can you tell us a little bit about Ithaca and what that means to you and how you were able to sort of evoke the spirit of Ithaca on this one?
Yeah, I went to Ithaca College for 2 years and then I dropped out of college, but I went for 2 years and I was a theater major and it was, you know, it was the first time in my life where I had so much freedom and I'd made a choice to be somewhere, you know, which we don't tend to do until we're in college. And I chose Ithaca. I think the fascination first started with the name, you know, it just sounded like, oh, you want to be there. And then looking at the lake and the theater program was so great. And then I got there and it's, you know, you take a bus downtown and walk through a gorge and it is this kind of hippie little town, right. And it's just it has a spirit to it. It really does. And then I also had that experience of being a young person starting out. And so, like at one point in the book, April says, "I feel like Ithaca is where I started," and that's how I feel about it. I feel like so much of my life started in Ithaca and so much of what has continued in my life, including like the people I've brought with me through my life, started there. And then it is just, you know, the slogan for Ithaca is gorgeous, like spelled like a gorge, not like gorgeous. Right. And it's true.
I had that poster in my house, you know, the Ithaca is gorgeous poster. I, you know, remember seeing that.
I have a t-shirt and I always wear it out here in California. And I think like, do people think I can't spell? I was a little embarrassed.
Did they get
but
it?
Proud.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Great.
So how about for you? How did place affect your story?
So, you know, it's set in a suburban and, you know, sort of wealthy suburban town. It's not my town, but it's a nearby town. Most people in the Boston area can pretty much figure out where it is. And it's a very wealthy town. And Scott moves there because he's, you know, they both grew up in, you know, in a tough neighborhood in Boston. And Scott becomes this very wealthy baseball player, sort of it's not what's important to him. What's important to him is baseball. And suddenly he has all this money. So he buys a big house in a wealthy suburb and he doesn't really know what to do with it. And she gets there and they're both sort of scratching their heads because it's not what they're familiar with. One of the secondary characters, as you know, is Laurel, the woman next door, who is very uptight, always well-dressed, always wearing, you know, the best fashion and, you know, perfect house. And, you know, she's a perfectionist and she has these 4 beautiful boys. and she too is an alcoholic. So what I wanted to, I chose the Boston area because that's where I live. Other than those first 3 years in Ithaca, we very quickly came to Boston, so it's what I'm familiar with, and sort of that Boston mentality, that Boston vibe, the Boston accent, sort of the, hi, how are you? That kind of, I wanted that to sort of, I wanted to put them with their, sort of solid Bostonianism into this, sort of Tony suburb, and have them be sort of the kooky kids next door. So, and it's something that I feel, then having Fenway be part of it and having, so it felt like a real Boston story. It's been interesting. I've done some radio interviews and, that kind of thing. And people are like, well, I'm a Yankee fan. Okay, all right. Well, the Red Sox, there's a whole scene where the Red Sox play the Yankees. Not going to tell you what happens. And they're like, oh, no, what happened? It's like, no, maybe you don't.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
So funny.
So yeah, it's fun. It's fun.
Yeah,
I have a question for you about your beautiful cover.
Yes.
And it's not, it is a really interesting, it's very cool. Like, I was like, that's a cool cover. So was this the first cover they gave you? Is this, how did you have to fight for? I mean, you and I have both had some cover fights.
Yes.
So I was wondering about that.
So I was so lucky with this book. I didn't actually talk about my journey with this book, but I spent 15 years writing it and trying to find the right people to support my exact vision for this book. And then I finally did. And so by the time we were at the cover and figuring out the title, I knew I was in good hands. And I knew that they saw the book the way that I did, which was amazing. And they must have done, I think, almost like 50 covers for this book, trying to get it right. Gosh. And at one point in that process, I saw one that I loved. It was actually very beautiful. It was a girl sitting on top of a car looking out at water, and she looked like April. And I was like, okay, this is good. This is very good. And they went back and said, like, it's very specific, so it's not big enough, and came back with more covers, which was so exciting. And then I think there were 4 of them that were as good as this one, which was so exciting. I've never had this experience before. But then this one just really kind of captured all of our hearts. Like, it was a good agreement of like, wow, I want to look at that. Like, you want to get closer to it. And then I think it does fit the book because, April, one of the things they talk about is like somebody makes the joke of like, April showers bring Mayflowers. What do Mayflowers bring? And dealing with the concept of, Mayflowers are like the good thing that happens after a storm. And so having a big ray of sun, especially for a young woman who's living in her car and cold a lot of the time, it felt like the hopeful part of this book. And so I was really excited about that. And I know I love this cover. I love the colors of it and the cape and all of that. And I think it captures the feeling of somebody standing there trying to figure out how to stand strong in themselves. So I loved that cover for its vibe. Like, I feel like the vibe is right on this, that she is sort of on the brink of something and she's looking out over this, sort of stormy sea, but there's a little bit of sun, the horizon's pink, like, if she can just get there. I love that. That being said, the first thing I said to them was like, yeah, but that never happened in the book. Like, readers are going to comment and like email me and say, like, because she never goes to the ocean. She's never at the ocean. She's never at any body of water. And like, I love when people say, like, what is that thing? Like, is that like a cape, or is it a blanket? Somebody said to me, oh, it looks like a parachute. Maybe she parachuted. And so I think it's really eye-catching. And I wanted them to, but I was worried that it was going to be like, that people are going to be confused because this is not a scene that happened in the book. And
sometimes writers are literal and they want to know like how does this fit in with the story, which I get, I totally understand. And some review I got already said, like, I'm not really sure about the cover, like where that came from. And I personally am not really sure about it either, but I do, at first I was like, I'm not sure. And then I really sort of fell in love with it. So I was happy with it, but I did not get 50 covers to choose from. So
they were amazing. They really did such, and I know how lucky I am for that. Like, I know what a great situation that is to be in. It's funny because like reading the book and then seeing this cover, I was sort of like, oh, that's interesting. Like, you don't remember that from the book, but I think it's like a soundtrack, it's like setting your mind. It's like, this is the feeling of the book. And I think it does that very well. And, it's both a blanket and a cape kind of in that situation.
Right. And a parachute.
And a parachute.
And a rain slipper. And all those things.
She needs all of those things.
She does.
Yeah. Which is really beautiful, I'm curious about your title actually, because it's the perfect title.
I have been through so many titles with this book. At one point it was called The Buddy System. At one point it was called McGreevy's Home for Lost Women and Dogs. That was pretty sweet. And my favorite title, which I gave it to my editor with, that she bought it as Dry Land. And I felt like, she is in the middle of the ocean trying to find dry land and also be a dry person, So I thought that had a lot of layers to it, and I thought that was great. And my editor seemed to be okay with it. Everyone seemed to be okay with it until it hit the sales team. And they said, it's too dry. And I was like, oh. And it is a little bit like it doesn't quite, I think it could mean too many things. So I sort of resolved myself to that. And then I spent days going through song titles and poems, everything about like drinking and baseball and babies and everything. I drove myself completely nuts. And then I came up with Catch Me If I Fall. And then, our Fiction Writers Co-op, this is a group that Allie and I both belong to, and it's 50 fiction writers, and it's a secret group. I love to say that it's a secret group.
It is secret.
But
it's so secret.
It's a group, and most of us have never met. I would say most of us Allie and I have never met in person. But we feel like we know each other because we cross promote each other's books, and we sort of help out, like, well, here's my cover, what do you guys think? Or did you hear this scuttlebutt about this latest thing happening in the industry? And
it's been going for 11 years. We've been in this group together for 11 years. Yes.
Yeah. So it's a fun group. And anyway, I threw it out to the group, and there was a whole thread about like, well, what about this? What about, and somebody, I think, came up with Catch Me When I Fall, because it's a matter of when. We all fall. We all fall off some wagon of some form. And then somebody else said, well, catch us when we fall, because we all fall.
Yeah.
And Cass is not the only person falling in this story. There's a lot of people who need help and support, and are struggling to reach out to find that help and support. So when we landed on that, it was like, okay, right. And then it's got this sort of the baseball thing of catch, catch us when, and the, more alcohol, falling off the wagon kind of thing. I actually wanted them to take the L on Catch Us When We Fall and have it tipped a little bit, like the L was falling. They wouldn't do it. They were like, no. So then they gave me that sort of, the F has that, I don't know if you can see it, that swirly font. So it's like that swooping font. I was like, okay, close enough.
That's a catch.
Right, I'll do it. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, it's a great font. It works really well. It's funny, that title scramble, I know it so well. And it is, you get to that point of like, what are words? Is this a word?
They lose their meaning. You say them so much. You just like, yes.
And then you think you found the thing because your mind is so processed, and you bring this terrible title to someone certain it is the title, and everybody's like, no.
And they're like, what? So how did you arrive at The People We Keep?
So for probably 8 or 9 of the years that I was working on this book, the title was Mayflower. It was the concept of the whole book that I was working on was, even like her name is April, but she was actually born in May, and everyone assumed she was, it was just, I was really working with that theme as I was writing the book. And it seemed like the obvious title, but it's the obvious title for a book about pilgrims.
Yes.
And so, I think like I couldn't, I meant the flower, but I couldn't really separate it. So then when my agent and I went out with it this time, we had settled on a Bob Dylan song title, If You See Her, Say Hello. And she listens to that song at some point, and it seemed like a good title, but it's also a big mouthful. And then we just went through, and I did the same thing where I was like trying to read poems about Mayflowers, I was reading, like ancient poems, and trying to find everything I could to, what if it's not the line with the Mayflower? What if it's the line after the Mayflower? I know what it means. You just get into this like whole thing of you're gonna find the right thing. You just have to try a little harder. And then Jen Bergstrom at Gallery, I think it was Jen, when we'd been going back and forth, she was like, what about this one? And of course, at that moment, I was like, but I really still wanted to be called Mayflower. It's Mayflower, So I was having a hard time with it. And then I stepped away for a second. I was like, it comes from something towards the end of the book. Like it comes from text. And it's perfect. It was the perfect title. But I absolutely did that diluted thing of, it's very hard to name something.
Yeah, it really is. No, I love the way she is on this sort of epic journey, and she goes all the way down the Eastern Seaboard, and the different places. Have you been to all those places that she has been? Because they really, your sense of figuring out how to do setting is really quite lovely. Okay. So she goes on this epic journey where she's meeting all these people, and most of them she does not keep. But she does, she figures out how to keep the right ones, which is just so lovely. Yeah.
It's funny too, because it goes right back to that Waterboy song in the beginning about like these things you keep, and like just dealing with the concept of what you take with you. So I want to ask you kind of a strange question, because I always want to ask this of writers, and then you said something that made me think, oh, okay, I think that's what's going on too. When you talked about the people by the gravesite, you mentioned that you saw them there. And I'm wondering about how your brain works. Do you see this stuff in your head like a movie?
I do. Yeah, I see it. I hear it, and there's a little bit of, there are that range of writers, the plotters who plot everything out, and the pantsers who fly by the seat of their pants and don't know anything and just like tear off into the story. And I'm kind of in the middle usually. I'm usually about like, I want to know the story arc, and I want to know some of the landmarks along the way, and I want to have a sense of, but this one was completely different because I hadn't taken that time to really think about this story before it landed in my lap. And so I was sort of in some ways figuring that stuff out as I went, and scrambling to do research about like, well, what is a baseball player? What's his day look like? And because I had sort of said, oh, he's a baseball player, and I thought maybe I'll change that or whatever. It was all very sort of off the cuff. But one of the things I like the best about writing is being surprised. And so you have this idea of what's going to happen, and you're typing and things don't always turn out the way, or what you hear them saying is not quite what you had in mind. Does that happen to you?
Oh yeah, that's completely my process too. And I've talked to people where some people are like that, but a lot of people have, I just thought that's how your brain worked until very recently, actually. I thought that's how everybody's brains worked, because that's how I need to write. I need to like picture it all in my head and almost like explore around in it.
Yes.
and describe what I'm seeing. It's like being in the middle of a movie, but I can like look over here and look over there and have the feelings and everything. And then I feel like I'm transcribing that experience more than anything else. And I can plot sometimes, you know, but it's subject to change.
Absolutely. Yeah. There have been plenty of times when I'm like, okay, you know, about 3/4 of the way through, this thing is going to happen. And then I get there and it's like, oh, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
I always describe it as being sort of like a dream. Like you're in a dream, but you're the director. And so you can sort of move the pieces around a little bit, but you're, and this is why, you know, I have 4 kids and I could not write when they were around because they were constantly like jumping into the dream. And I'd be like, you know, hey, Mom, where are my cleats? And I was like, oh, I lost it, you know? So I really needed to wait for them to go to school. Or I'd be up very late or I'd get up very early because I needed that sort of bubble, you know?
I understand that completely because yeah, it's like getting woken up and then trying to fall back to sleep. It's really hard to do.
Right.
I always joke that like if I've had a big concentration writing day, like, you know, in superhero movies, when they use their superpower and then their nose bleeds, like I always feel like at the end of one of those days, my nose should be bleeding. Like it's like I used all of my
out.
Yes, that's what it feels like. That's so exciting. Yeah. It's so funny because I just have I've kind of always thought that from reading your books that you have that like level of being in it. So I'm very excited to know that.
That's great.
Yeah, it's fun. So what's next for you?
So I actually just sold my next book. So that's
congratulations. That's amazing.
Yeah, that was kind of crazy. I wrote it very quickly during, you know, when we were in lockdown and there's nowhere to go, nothing to do, and nobody to see. And so I sort of plowed along. And it's a story about a woman who's in her 50s, and she's looking back on her life and realizing that she has a lot of regrets, that she made, you know, things kind of went sideways. You know, little decisions that she made that seemed like the right thing to do at the time sort of led her off in the wrong direction. And she can sort of pinpoint when things started going awry. And it was after a night in the woods with this boy that she really loved, who loved her. And they have this wonderful night in the woods, and things go terribly wrong the next day. And as a result, she makes decisions that, you know, lead her to where she is now. And it's been 40 years since she's seen this guy. She never saw him again after she left high school. And she's sitting in the woods and she has her little baby granddaughter and then sleeping on a backpack in her back. And this little boy comes, little 3-year-old comes like bombing through the woods alone and falls and trips and falls right in front of her. And she goes to pick him up and, you know, where's your grown up? And he and his grandfather comes bombing through the woods trying to find him. And it's the guy from high school.
Wow.
And she doesn't want to deal with it, it's too hard to look at. And he says, we really have to talk. We really have to talk. And so it's sort of the story of how, you know, what happened, how they got to that point in high school, and then what's happening. So it goes back and forth between now and 40 years ago. So
that's so exciting.
Yeah. Wow. Right now it's called With Me All the Time, based on it's from Maybe I'm Amazed by Paul McCartney.
Yeah.
Could change, as you know, it could change. So we'll see. What about you? What do you got going on?
So I realized while I was writing The People We Keep that I could write a lot of books at once if I wanted to. So anytime that I had those thoughts that you talked about where you're like, I just have to write down a chapter. I just have to, like the same inspiration that I had with April, I started to like collect stuff. And so I have 3 projects that I'm actually trying to figure out which one, you know, like they hit critical mass. And I've always sort of done that to some level without realizing it. You know, like I was working on this and Stay at the same time. And then I was working on, you know, I've just always had this, like a certain book didn't work out, but then it ended up being the book after that. So I've had stuff that marinated for a while and I like that process. So who knows, there could be something that, you know, I could have that moment of just, I got to write this down and, you know, a couple months later you have a draft, but for the most part, I'm really excited about these 3 different projects and I'm just trying to figure out they're more in line with the people we keep than with my first 3 books, but I'm excited about
Nice.
it.
Yeah, me too.
Thanks.
I love some Allison Larkin writing. So
Oh,
I'm looking
thank
forward
you.
to that.
Right back at
So
you. We're such a mutual admiration society.
Should we answer some questions?
Yeah, do we have questions?
Do we have
Yeah,
some questions?
audience, any questions that you have, please type them in the chat. And I actually have one that I could start things off with. So for both of you, these books are a real genre departure. Juliette, you've been writing historical fiction recently. Allison, you've been writing rom-coms, and now these are very different. Did you find yourselves using a very different part of your brain as you were writing in this different style?
Interesting.
I can go if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that because my characters all had like my characters all have kind of the same, like a similar heart, you know, to a certain extent, even though the stories are different. A lot of it was the same, but I feel like the duration of April in my life and the clarity with which I saw her right away, it was like she was just always kind of there. It was always a place I could slip into. And so that was very different. It was, you know, whenever I had a spare moment, I could always, and I wasn't working on another project, I could always just be like, I wonder what April's doing right now, and slip into seeing the world through April's eyes. And so she's been a constant, and I've appreciated that. So it's a little bit different, but I also did treat my rom-com books that way in terms of, you know, the depth of character and things like that. So nice. How about you?
So my first 3 books were contemporary fiction, and then I wrote 2 in historical fiction. And I find that historical fiction feels really different for me in terms of voice. I feel like I need to write in the voice of the time. So both the Tumbling Turner Sisters and the City of Flickering Light are set in the late 1919, early 1920s. And so I tried to sort of bring in more of a voice of what people sounded like in that time. It didn't feel like me telling the story so much as me interpreting and giving the story, but with that, I really wanted to have that flavor of what people sounded like at that time. I feel like my contemporary fiction is much more my voice telling the story. It's funny, people who know me will say, like, I could hear you, you know. Somebody just said that to me today. I can hear you when I read your books, you know. So that's kind of funny. I like both. I mean, I may very well go back to historical fiction. It's sort of but it is a different way to use my brain in terms of how I assemble a story. You know, historical fiction has so much more research, so much more, you know, you need to get the facts right kind of thing. And contemporary fiction, although that requires research too, feels a little less, there's fewer plates spinning for me. It's just a different kind of challenge. So thanks, that was a great question.
Yeah.
I've got a question for you both, and that is, we've hosted a lot of different authors throughout this year and a half, and some of them have had, you know, just the best time working ever in their writing, and some have just not had any luck at all with getting their writing. How is writing during the quarantine and during the pandemic been for both of you?
I can answer that one. When things started happening at the end of March 2020, and we were all like panicked, and it was terrifying, and how long would this go on, and where could you find toilet paper and all that stuff. You know, I'm a big walker, and I would go on a walk around the neighborhood, and people would say, you must be getting so much writing done. And I would be like, what? No, I am not. Like, I am so distracted, I can't even read. Like, I found that my brain I had to like do other chores. I did a lot of like cleaning out the attic and rearranging my garden, and like I had to do stuff. My brain was not in any way in a place to create, because I was too anxious and stressed out. And then in August, this idea sort of came to me about this woman sort of reviewing her life, in part because I looked around and I felt like we're all kind of reviewing, we're taking this pause. A lot of us are taking this pause and sort of sit here and say, well, what does my life look like right now? Is this a job I should have? Is this a person I should be with? Is this, people seem to be taking that time to review. And by August, I sort of felt like, okay, I'm in this, I'm doing, this is what life looks like now. And I was able to write. And I found that it was really nice to sort of take a vacation from the reality of what was going on around us, especially with the election and all of that stuff, and just be like, oh, I'm just going to go be with Helen now, my imaginary friend. So, Allie, what about you?
I had edits for The People We Keep during the pandemic. So, and that was an interesting thing where a lot of the people I knew were like, who work in offices all of a sudden, or had very, very active social lives all of a sudden are like, I have so much time. And I'm like, I don't have a moment. And, so that was a strange situation, but I was so thankful for it too, because it was this world that I knew how to operate in, and it was problems I knew how to solve. And it was this concrete thing to do. And then, I have kind of played with other ideas and stuff like that. So that's been good. But I really feel like April helped me in this whole process. I sold the book soon after, like sometime I think in March maybe. So it was soon after, and it was a big help. I appreciated it.
No, that's great.
So we are just about out of time, but I did just get an anonymous audience question message to me asking what you can tell us about your secret writers group and how that was formed. Now, maybe a secret, you might not be able to tell. So what can you tell us about it?
I think the word secret is so fun and special. I think that Facebook just calls it a secret group because it's not open to the public. So that's why I call it. It's not really a secret. We all, it was the idea of Kathy Marie Buchanan, I believe.
Yeah.
And she felt like there needed to be a way for writers to kind of support each other. And so she invited a bunch of us to be part of this group where we would, and the original idea, I think, was just to cross promote each other's stuff. So you have a book coming out. I'm going to post about it. Maybe I got an early copy and I got a chance to read it. So I can say, oh my gosh, this book is wonderful. Or, just a way to sort of get, help each other get the book out into the world. And then as we all starting, like somebody would say, have you heard about this thing that they're doing? And, or what, how should I handle this? And we all started to kind of get to know each other a little bit just online. I mean, I have not heard the voices of most of these people, and I feel like I know them well. We got to sort of get to know each other and support each other. A lot of times, things go wrong. Somebody will say, oh my God, you guys, you can't believe what just happened. Or something goes great. We can all, sort of celebrate it. So it's 50 writers. We've capped it at 50. Occasionally, somebody will say, I'm going to move on. And, we sort of choose somebody else who, and it's all kinds, all genres. So, which is nice because you get to sort of be aware of stuff that you wouldn't necessarily gravitate towards. But we all, it's very mutually supportive, and that's how I met Alan.
Yeah, it's funny because we actually talked on the phone for the first time a month ago or something like that, and it was just like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. We're just gonna chat. It felt like because we haven't known each other for such a long time, and I've met because I live right outside of San Francisco, and people come in for book events, and there's also a bunch of us are in that area, so I've met a bunch of co-authors in person, and you're never surprised. You're just like, oh. Yeah, right, of course that's you.
Yeah,
How are you? It almost feels like, oh, it's been so long since I've seen you,
Right. Yeah,
which is a wonderful thing. I'm so thankful for it.
Yeah. One of the very nice things about technology. Technology isn't always nice, but that's been a really nice thing.
Yeah. Writing can be such a solitary job, and it's a tough industry, and having that support sounds like it must mean the world. So that's amazing.
It really does.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time tonight. This has been a really amazing conversation. I've so enjoyed hearing from both of you about your books, and hearing you together has been just a real pleasure. So thank you both so much for taking the time to do this with us.
Thank you.
It's been a delight.
This is wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
And congratulations, Juliette. I'm so excited.
Thank you. You too. Allie's book is a book of the month for the for the what's the name of I'm sorry, I'm blanking
Book
on
the Month
the
Club.
Book of the
for
Month
the-
Club. That's it.
Yes.
And she's in the running for Book of the Year, so I'm very excited about that.
Thank you.
Congratulations, that's
Thank you so
amazing.
much. Thanks.
And if you haven't already, you can order both of these authors' books at northshire.com and check out our schedule of other upcoming virtual events. Hopefully we'll see you all again at another night soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Bye.